Hello guys, welcome to Soul Fiction. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto mastered Ultra Instinct with Whis Dragon Ball? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. A Bell That Doesn't Ring. Whis stirred his tea with a motion so small it looked like the cup was deciding to spin on its own. The air on Beerus's world always felt like it had been laundered and hung under a sky too blue to doubt. Floating islets edged the horizon like stepping stones for some large, polite god. Crickets no one had ever seen made a music that never got in the way. Naruto stood barefoot in the grass with his hands loose at his sides. He faced the bell. It hung from the crook of Whis' staff, a glass pear the size of a thumb, clear as a tear, with a ribbon of silver threading its heart. It didn't vibrate in the breeze. It didn't acknowledge the world. Every training day began and ended with that bell. The rule was one line long. Touch the staff. Don't make it ring. Naruto drew in a breath. The bell reflected him. Sun-brown skin. Bright eyes narrowed in concentration, hair like a flame that thought better of burning anything. He let the breath go. When he stepped, he moved as if the LD had been waiting for him to choose where it would be. He missed, by less than a leaf's width. The bell chimed. It wasn't loud. It was honest. Whis smiled as if a private joke had been proven again gently. Again, Naruto rocked back, rubbing at the back of his neck. One of these days your bell is going to learn manners and keep its mouth shut. It has perfect manners, actually, Whis said, tasting his tea. It speaks exactly when it should. The second attempt was worse because he wanted it too much. His hand tried to be a plan. The bell said no, bright as daylight. Naruto stepped away, breathing out impatience with the care of someone setting a hot pan on a table that mattered. He rolled his shoulders, bounced once, then stilled. No stance, no glare, just a boy in the grass with a nay to walk that couldn't be walked by worrying at it. He closed his eyes because Whis had never said he couldn't. The world grew particular when his eyes were gone. The weight of air on his arms, the warmth sliding down his skin from the sun, the way one blade of grass tickled his big toe more insistently than the others. He gave up cataloging. He let the tickle stand and become part of the room he was in. The bell was part of that room too. He didn't erase it. He accepted it the way he accepted the grass and the sweat on his ribs and his own heartbeat and the breath in his mouth. His hand lifted. The bell stayed mute. He touched the staff. No sound. Whis' eyes creased with real praise that he didn't say out loud. Naruto opened his, saw his fingers where they were, and snorted. You didn't ring it, Whis said mildly. Yeah, Naruto flexed his fingers. I also didn't breathe for a second there. That part seems important. It is, Whis said. Most mistakes happen inside the tiny choice your body makes when you misunderstand your own breathing. Naruto made a face. You're saying I think I'm a better liar than my chest. I would never accuse you of lying to yourself, Whis said, amused. Not when the bell can do it for me. Beerus's voice drifted across the lawn like a complaint that had packed its own pillows. If the bell is finished insulting our guest, are we near the part where a kitchen becomes involved? Naruto turned. Lord Beerus lay under a parasol in the shade, a lounging figure of sharp ears and sharper appetite, wearing the expression of a monarch who had decided. Magnanimity looked exactly like being fed. A bowl sat near his elbow. It was empty in a way that accused the world of negligence. Gimme 30 minutes, Naruto said. No, 20. I want to run the sleeve drill again. The sleeve drill, Beerus said suspiciously, sounds like it culminates in disappointment. I permit you to surprise me. Whis lifted his staff. The bell went very quiet as Naruto shrugged into an old, fraying jacket. Loose cloth pulled around his wrists and whispered around his elbows. Whis waggled two fingers in the air and a breeze threaded itself through the lawn, not enough to push a child. Enough to suggest there were children somewhere laughing. Walk, Whis said. Naruto walked. The game was to let the sleeve move before his arm did, to read the way the wind wanted and then be kind to it. The first time he had tried he'd fought the jacket, cursed it, scrunched his shoulders to pin it down. That had been months ago. Or days, or a lifetime. Time had a way of pouring into something useful here. He flowed. The sleeve lifted, ballooned, and Naruto let it carry his forearm up a hair, then handed the motion off to his wrist like a good teammate. The jacket stopped being an obstacle and became a coach. When the wind tugged at his left, his foot found the soft spot to step that didn't resist and didn't collapse. He thought of being late to Ichiraku and splitting down a crowded street by listening to feet he couldn't see. The memory carried him better than any lecture would have. He crossed the lawn, turned, crossed back. On the fifth pass Whis snapped his WRI. Saint and a bell drifted down from nothing to hang in the air in front of Naruto's chest. Now every time the sleeve brushed it, chime. Naruto didn't scowl. He laughed. Okay, rude. He did it again, and this time when the wind carried his sleeve toward the bell he angled his forearm with that tiny barely choice that came before choice, the way you lean half a breath before you decide to tell a joke. The cloth slipped past the glass without touching. His foot landed, and the bell stayed polite. Whis' head tipped the tiniest fraction. Better. Hungry, Beerus announced. So hungry that the very idea of patience offends me. Is offense a seasoning? If so, I suppose you've made progress. Naruto grinned at him and padded toward the little kitchen they'd set up near the edge of the island. The counter was smooth stone. The knives were old and happy. He washed his hands without looking and set water to boil. Broth from the bone he'd simmered yesterday went into a pot with kombu from a place he had never asked the name of. Because asking would make it less fun to imagine it had a dragon in it. He cracked bones with the heel of his hand, skin and joint sure, the way a carpenter knew where a board would be grateful to split. Everything was easy in small ways. He didn't fight for a knife because he'd learned where his fingers wanted to be. He cut ginger with the rhythm of the cricket that always got ahead of its friends and then came back to apologize. The kettle screamed, then realized it didn't have to, and sighed instead. When a ladle slipped, he turned his wrist and gave the handle a place to go that was not the floor. He didn't look down. He didn't need to. Beerus watched all this with the narrowed eyes of someone deciding the world had not failed him after all. The smell, he said solemnly, as an argument in favor of civilization. Naruto ladled broth. He tasted, frowned, added a splash of soy and then an equal but opposite splash of something sweet. He didn't measure. He listened. A bit of oil hissed. Then settled. The noodles went in. The eggs came out. The table got set because his hands had learned what plates meant. Whis drifted closer, a satisfied parenthesis to the scene. Notice, he said, voice light but precise, how your attention never needed to argue with your hands. I'm trying not to, Naruto said. Every time I try to notice it, I notice it too hard. Whis smiled. That sentence is exactly why you will be fine. They ate. Beerus did not trouble the meal with conversation beyond the repeated, deeply felt syllable, more. Naruto obliged, a coup. K who fought gods on the side and took pride in neither activity needing apology. When the bowls were quiet and the wind went back to rehearsing its soft speech, Whis stood. His staff rang. The bell didn't move. It rang anyway. A sound like a coin dropped into deep water. No clatter, just the weight of metal choosing down. Whis' eyes shifted, then stilled. He held the staff out and the bell's center brightened. In its glass Naruto saw a street he knew too well. A market in Konoha, all paper lanterns and baskets of greens, the electrical stink of skewers, the laughter you heard in the back of your ribs. He saw the air change there. It stopped carrying itself and started being carried by something else. A fine lattice dropped across the square, too delicate to see unless you were the kind of boy who noticed sleeves, bells, breaths. People's knees buckled. A Jonin stepped to catch a child and missed because his arm didn't finish the thing it said it would do. The bell's sound was small and total. I cannot intervene directly, Whis said. No drama, just the respect you used to count knives. Not there. Yeah, Naruto said softly. I didn't think you would. Beerus had gone still in a particular way of a predator who had found himself respecting someone else's hunt. Is your ramen finished? For now, Naruto said. Whis rotated the staff once and the vision folded back into glass. He rested the butt on the ground and the small bell stilled. One more exercise, then. Naruto's mouth twitched. Of course. Whis flicked his wrist. Above the lawn, a path appeared, a procession of hanging bells, each the size of a fist. Each tied to a thread of light that went nowhere. They stretched from the edge of the island to a smaller floating rock across a gap full of blue. The first one sat at waist height. The next hung lower. The third was higher by exactly the amount that made your calves ache. The last one was almost level with Whis's chin. "Walk," he said. "Tell me a story." "Nah." Naruto groaned in a way that was mostly a laugh. "You're really committed to making me trip over my own mouth." Beerus made a gracious, dismissive flick. "I disapprove of story time on principle and for reasons of appetite, but if you must, do it efficiently." Naruto stepped to the edge of the lawn. The wind between the bells did not move. The bells themselves did not sway. He glanced at Whis. "About?" he asked. "Anything true," Whis said. "Preferably something you are not used to saying out loud." Naruto scratched the back of his head, push up for a thought. He put his foot on the first bell. It shifted less than a breath. He made room. The second bell was further than it looked. He didn't reach. He let his body find the way reach wasn't necessary, and then the reach happened as a result, a consequence rather than a demand. The third bell tried to tell him a story about his calves. He let it, then let it pass. He talked. "I used to think running was about being fast," he said, conversational, to the air. "But the kind of running that matters is about knowing where the crowd will part. Ichiraku taught me that and he didn't know he did. If you set a bowl down right when someone's log H hits the part where they need a breath, the steam goes up into their face and it smells like home." The fourth bell tickled his ankle. He gave it his ankle and didn't give it more. The fifth bell wanted his hip. He gave it his hip and not his balance. He imagined Hinata laughing with her mouth not quite open and choosing to be brave in ways nobody applauded because nobody saw the effort. He didn't. He tried to stop that thought when it moved his shoulders. He let it warm his chest and not act like warmth was a problem. The sixth bell was too far if you believed in too far. Naruto didn't. He breathed. Ed in the distance found another idea of itself. He was there. Whis walked along on the lawn, always level with him without moving fast or slow. "What would make you ring one of them?" Whis asked. "Trying to save it," Naruto said instantly. He didn't look down. "Trying to make it perfect. I always screw up when I try to bottle the good parts." The seventh bell sat in a slant that wanted to twist his knee when he stepped. His foot landed with his toes a hair turned, and the bell accepted it. "What would make you silent?" Whis asked. Naruto almost laughed at that because there were a dozen answers. All of them trying to be clever. He didn't pick the best. He picked the honest. "Being worshipped," he said. "I'm not built for people writing songs while I'm still trying to figure out which burner to turn off first." Beerus made an interested noise that might have been a yawn. The eighth bell wobbled and settled. "Why help them then?" Whis asked. "Tone light as air, weight like a hand on your shoulder made of wind." Naruto took another step. "The bell didn't ring. Because I know what I'm good at and because I like who I am when I'm useful," he said. "And because I promised a few people I'd try to be the kind of man who was safe to stand next to." Whis' smile was small and genuine and gone quickly. "Good. The ninth bell was the kind you could only reach if you forgot you were reaching and remembered you were moving." Naruto put his heel down and let his toes be the last part of his foot to change their mind. He crossed to the final bell and looked at the last gap, a stretch of sky too wide for a hop and too narrow for a refusal. He exhaled. The memory that came to him wasn't a fight or a mentor's lecture or the smell of oiled steel. It was a bowl of ramen set down on a summer night, the crack of egg on pot. The way steam curled up blue in evening air and made a halo over someone's hair as they laughed. It was a bell stringing a tone through a street that stayed open 'cause everyone in it was willing to make room for someone else for half a breath. He stepped, not up, not down, not far. He let the space be a door he had always meant to use and simply hadn't yet. His foot met the bell with the lightness of a thought that didn't need to take up space. No sound. He stood on the far rock and looked back. The bells hung between him and Whis like a music that had decided to be patient. Whis inclined his head. "A good story. Kind of boring," Naruto admitted, hands on hips, grinning with relief he didn't mind showing. The grin fell away. The vision of Konoha stayed in his chest. An ache that felt like work waiting to be done. Whis twirled his staff once. The path of bells folded back into blue like a ribbon being put away where it belonged. You won't have me in your ear, he said. I know. You won't have the bell to scold you. Plenty of people volunteer for that job. Whis's eyes softened. You have accepted the world as it is enough times that you can change it without breaking yourself. Do that, and when you cannot, move so that you don't make the break worse. Beerus sat up with a sigh that made the parasol disapprove. If you are going to go, go. Your absence will make my next bowl taste twice as good when you return to cook it. Naruto saluted Beerus with 2 fingers and didn't make a joke that would stretch this into the kind of goodbye you tripped over. He walked back across the grass to Whis and stopped within arm's reach. He didn't hug the angel. You didn't hug storms or mountains or teachers who had already given you more closeness than you guessed most people got. He offered a small, complete smile. Thanks, he said. Whis set the staff's end on the ground. You did the running, he said, polite. The lawn brightened. The staff lifted. The part of the world containing Naruto slid slightly to the left, then forward, then home. He landed in air that remembered dust. A leaf caught in his hair and thought better of staying. He village looked almost the same. Blue sky, tan walls, the market's bright awnings, but it felt like a room held at arm's length. The air had gone thin and precise. The lattice had been laid down acros. It by an artist who didn't like laughter. Naruto didn't move. Through the corner of his eye he saw a child begin to topple because her mother's hands had not finished their sentence. He did not think. His shoulder arrived where it needed to be and the little girl's head found a wall of orange cloth that did not bruise. He set her down, eyes on the way the light slanted wrong. He heard bells, small and strung somewhere out of sight. They were perfectly quiet. Behind him, somewhere out of the world, a single bell on a crooked staff rang once as if to say, "Good luck, troublemaker." Naruto rolled his neck. The movement felt like the beginning of a smile a long way off. Okay, he said to nobody and to the air that had decided to be difficult. Let's fix what we can. He stepped. The lattice reed to make his knee a stranger to his ankle. He negotiated. He gave it his knee and took the rest. A fishmonger dropped a skewer. His hand arrived without looking and the stick met his palm instead of someone's face. The fishmonger made a sound of outrage that turned into thanks mid-breath because outrage was too slow to survive in this much trouble. Naruto didn't sprint. He wouldn't have made it 3 steps if he had. He moved like water taking a shortcut and let the street offer him choices. A man with a bandage on his chin staggered a step. Naruto eased his shoulder into him and the man's weight spilled into a safe direction. A bell string up above caught the light and made a memory without music. Naruto's hands found knots, not people. His feet found lines, not cobbles. He felt the Addis now in a way that was not language. It punished intent. It jested at plans. It made precision misbehave. He had graduated out of argument. He didn't give it a plan. A kunai flashed. Clean, not aimed at him. Aimed at a target that a hand had meant to be, then hadn't. Naruto's fingers spoke to it. They asked it to be somewhere else, very politely. It agreed. There, he said under his breath to his own bones. Not chasing. Not fighting. Finding the place where this doesn't matter. He had time to think one other thought. Hinata would know exactly where to put her foot in this, exactly how to move her palm to tell a wayward body how to remember itself, and then the lattice spiked. On the far side of the square a seam in the sky breathed and let out 4 figures in white that made you think of rules before you thought of faces. They didn't stomp. They didn't flare. They simply were. They stepped in and the air was more theirs than it had been a second ago. Their eyes were calm, not arrogant. Calm like a laundromat at midnight. Calm like a hallway nobody ran in. The one in front glanced at Naruto and then through him and then back, as if his gaze had tried not to snag and discovered it had to. Naruto smiled. It wasn't cocky. It wasn't brave. It was the kind of smile you wore to walk into a difficult kitchen with a dozen orders down and the fryer being fussy. He rolled his shoulders, felt the sleeve he wasn't wearing, and gave the wind a chance to say something before he did. He didn't have Whis's bell to tell him if he was lying to himself. He had the quiet weight of every step he had just taken. And the way his own breath didn't try to outrun him. Hi, he said, like this was a market and not a battlefield pretending to be polite. You here for the food or the fight? The leader's mouth almost smiled back, but didn't. We're here, he said, voice clear and mild, to tidy. The lattice flexed. Naruto moved. Chapter 1 end. Chapter 2. The leaf that dodges lightning. The market had been built to argue with hunger. Lanterns threw warm color over cabbages and peppers. A vendor leaned on his counter inventing louder adjectives for skewers until the words themselves smelled like char. It should have been noisy. It wasn't. The quietus lattice that had slipped down from the seam in the sky made sound hesitant, as if every syllable needed a permit. A shinobi stumbled trying to pivot. His knee changed its mind halfway through. Naruto slid a shoulder into his back, turned him with the ease of an apology, and planted him against a pillar that would care for him until he could care for himself. The little girl clung to Naruto's sleeve and peered out with the priority list of a child. Are the scary people looking at me, and if so, do I have to deal with it alone? You're good, Naruto said. Already stepping. Tell your mom you saved me first. Her laugh beat the lattice by a fraction. It was enough. The 4 figures in white moved like erasers. Their uniforms were NT exactly clothes, more the suggestion of a rule wrapped around a body. Under the hoods you caught the impression of faces that hadn't committed to a shape. The one in front, the one who'd promised to tidy, gestured with 2 fingers. The air tightened. Naruto felt the net the way a cook felt the weight of steam leaving a pot. The lattice didn't grab, it recommended. Muscles that wanted to act found themselves waiting to be asked twice. Very neat. Very clean. It weaponized the moment between intention and motion. He treated it like it was Whis asking him a question he already knew the answer to. He let the answer arrive before he produced the question. He caught a falling sack by giving his hand somewhere to be. He guided a running child into a pocket of air that remembered how to be kind. Byakugan. Someone breathed behind him, half relief, half warning. Hinata slid into view without announcing herself, eyes pale and full of maps the rest of them had to pretend didn't exist. She was airborne for a heartbeat, pivoted off a post with toes that forgot gravity long enough to make it feel stupid, and landed beside him. She didn't look at him. He didn't look at her. They knew where the other was by the way the space moved. 3 nodes, she said, voice low and calm. Low left, high right, behind the awning with the boar symbol. The lattice strands are braided. Touch and they tighten. Copy, Naruto said, because he liked the feel of the word in his mouth when she was giving directions. She sent a palm strike into an empty piece of air the shape of a triangle. Nothing was there until her fingers arrived. Gentle step made the knot there realize it had edges. The net twanged, not audibly, but in the way Naruto's ankles suddenly felt honest again. One of the white figures glanced over, measuring. Naruto didn't stop. He skimmed the edge of a stall where cuttlefish hung from hooks and remembered the bells that should have been singing overhead. They sat in a gentle bow of string between 2 poles, motionless. Like a row of old men who had all decided to be polite at the same time. Front man talks like a broom, Naruto said under his breath. Hinata's mouth almost smiled. He's trying to anchor attention to himself. The lattice flexes whenever we focus on him. Noted. The leader lifted a hand. The lattice throbbed. Several civilians froze mid-step, eyes wide. Shino. Bai on the roof stumbled and scraped out a line of tile with his knee. The white figure tilted his head, as if he had dropped salt into a dish and wanted to see if it brightened. Back corridors, a voice called from the west. Dry and unamused. Now, wind stood up and acquired an opinion. It came down the lanes in planes, not gusts, carving transparent walls and floors where a street had been. Pap. Umbrellas shivered as air learned a cleaner way to travel. The smell of dust changed in your mouth. Tamari hit the square without bothering to take credit for the way half the market suddenly had tea. He good sense to move in the same direction. Naruto didn't hide the smile that bumped his cheek up. Good to see you. Too loud, she said, already past him, already measuring the angles that turned panic into flow. She planted the base of her fan, snapped it open, and a sheet of wind pressed civilians away from a falling cart as if a gentle bouncer had put one hand on everyone's chest at once. Evac corridors west by northwest. Don't jam them. If you jam them I will personally find you and make you unjam. You, fisherman, stop arguing with geometry. Her eyes flicked to the men in white and slid off like oil. Who are our fashion mistakes? People who think cleaning up looks like erasing. Naruto said, and stepped into the open like he'd been called. The leader's gaze touched him the way a fingertip explored dust. He made a small adjustment to the lattice. Naruto felt his right shoulder get a little less sure of what it was attached to. He relaxed, allowed the uncertainty to be the floor and not a hole. His center shifted. No stumble, no ring. You move without asking, the leader said, voice the kind polite people used when informing you they would be removing your furniture. I'm extremely rude, Naruto said. Bad upbringing. Your kind disorganize outcomes. We prune for continuity. Temari snorted. I prune roses. Different job. The leader considered her the way a book considers a page number. Containment suffices, he said to no one they could see. They moved. Two of them threaded the market's left side, hands loose at their sides, feet precise. The air hissed where they went. Stalls softened into hush. A man tried to throw a kunai and forgot to complete it. The weapon found a new job as metal being metal and clinked across the stones. Hinata's hand brushed Naruto's sleeve. Signal, she whispered. They cut sound, Naruto said, glancing up at the row of unringing bells. We used their habit. They went together, and anybody watching might have thought they were improvising. Which was only true in the way water improvises when it finds a path it likes. Hinata ducked under a quiet strand and put 2 fingers to a string near a bell's knot. Gentle chakra seeped into hemp. The bell trembled a hair. Not a sound, a promise. Naruto slipped through a gap and flicked a pebble exactly as if he meant to miss. It touched the bell's lip with a kiss smaller than a thought. Chime. It wasn't loud. It didn't have to be. In the net of enforced hush, the clean note wrote itself into the bodies of shinobi who knew what signals were for. Temari's head tipped a fraction, her fan pivoted. The wind corridor shunted a new way. A mother aimed her feet toward the freshest opening without wondering why she knew. Naruto moved through the bells. He let his sleeves take the lead. The white figures noticed. Of course. They tried to cut the string, not with a blade, by recommending it stop behaving like a string. Hinata's fingers kept it honest. She didn't wrestle, she reminded. The knot remembered friction. The bell rang again, one clear note like the beginning of a plan. I thought you said you were rude, Temari called over the thinned air, not looking. I'm rude with style, Naruto said. The leader lifted 2 fingers and made a small, almost bored motion. Quietus braided tighter. Naruto's right calf sent up a tired complaint that was actually a warning. The net wanted to grab the moment between foot and ground and call it a mistake. He changed nothing. He let that moment be large enough to live in. His heel found the cobble and the rest of him followed as if he had planned it. The leader's gaze sharpened a hair, then relaxed, not indulgent, just resigned, like a man acknowledging a knot had been tied by a professional. Interesting, he said. He flicked his wrist. A needle of nothing flew. Naruto didn't see it. He felt the absence behind it, the way the air made a hole for something to arrive in. He moved 3 degrees left. It made no difference. The needle curved, uninterested in angles. It kissed his collarbone with the precise affection of a stamp finding the corner of an envelope. Cold, not cold like weather, cold like a decision that had never needed to be made until now. And then, suddenly, was. A sigil crawled across his skin without leaving a mark, a diagram whose lines he could not track because they weren't on his skin so much as underneath the verbs his muscles used. For a second, the world took a deep breath on his behalf. The leader lowered his hand. Silence brand, he said, almost helpful. Temporary. Informational. Temari cursed once, efficiently. Hinata turned her body between Naruto and the thrower in a way that was not romantic or dramatic and would save his life if something else came. Naruto flexed his fingers. They weren't asleep. They were considering their options. A bell above him creaked and didn't ring. He felt the space inside his chest where reflex had lived without rent. It was still there. It was just being asked for paperwork. Informational, Naruto repeated. Good to know you're bored. We are not bored, the leader said. We are measuring. The next minute got small and big at the same time. Small, because time acquired more edges than it usually carried. Big, because everything in it mattered. Naruto stopped adding effort. The lattice swallowed effort like a salt flat drank water, looked the same, was treacherous underneath. He went the other way. He let everything he didn't need go. The brand tugged, and he allowed himself to be tugged an inch in a way that turned a pull into a pivot. He and Hinata broke a 3-person team by accident that looked like plan. She palm cut a seam in the air, he tripped over it on purpose, their momentum made a pattern that encouraged a white figure to be somewhere he did not enjoy. The figure stepped out cleanly. Hinata's eyes sharpened, calculating the future the way other people read street signs. "They're archiving our movements," she said, pulse steady, not breathless. "The air remembers and offers it to them. So we stop being reruns," Naruto said. "New show, or we let me write the reruns," Temari called, and a wind wall stamped itself into place behind them like a book slammed shut. White garments fluttered, annoyed. The leftmost of the 4 tried to pierce the wall with a hand that was a smudge of logic and bone. The wall didn't care. It jammed the hand's polite request with grain and grit. The hand retreated. Civilians moved in the corridors Temari built with a speed that was not panic, it was obedience to good design. A man with a broken arm tried to argue himself toward his shop. Temari didn't look as her wind pushed him toward safety, the way a clever friend takes your elbow while you lie to yourself. The lead. R watched it all like a librarian noting foot traffic. He adjusted nothing. He lifted a small square device and showed no one its face. "We have enough," he said. The white figures folded. That was what it looked like. Not retreat. Not flight. Folding, neatly, into the crease between moments. The lattice didn't vanish. It exhaled, then held itself with just enough structure to make people think twice. The man with the broken arm blinked at where the leader had been and failed to recall whether a person had held that space. Naruto stared at the place where the needle had touched him. His collarbone didn't show a mark. The brand sat under things. He fought the impulse to scratch nothing. Hinata's hand hovered and then didn't, because touching meant something here and not touching meant something too. "Are you fine?" he said. He wasn't lying. He just didn't have language yet for all the parts of fine. Temari's fan lowered a fraction. She surveyed the square like a carpenter calling out. Which beams would have to be replaced by sundown? "Wind corridors stay for 5 more minutes, she said. "Whoever runs that skewer stall, close the flame. You, yes, you, with your finger in your belt, help that woman with the blue shawl. Don't look at me like that, I know your mother, and she's meaner than I am." A laugh blurted out of someone it didn't belong to and a row of bells finally rang as if they'd been given permission. The sound softened everything. The lattice sulked and let 3 shinobi stand up straighter than they thought they could. Naruto moved through pockets of not quite tea putting bodies where bodies needed to be. He passed a stall where ramen bowls listed like small boats and, without thinking, righted them. His hands understood plates. It steadied his breath and the way his next step found the place between step and fall. A small boy with a paint-smeared face tugged his sleeve. "Are they ghosts?" he asked, with the uncomplicated contempt children reserve for mysteries that make grown-ups useless. "No," Naruto said, checking the boy's knees and elbows the way a medic had taught him you could help without daring to pretend you knew what you were doing. "They're just bad at markets." The boy frowned. "Then why'd everybody stop?" "Because they wanted us to," Naruto said. And for a second we agreed. The boy processed that with a level of scorn he would grow into gracefully. "That's dumb," he decided. "I like you," Naruto said. "Tell Temari that if she needs a lieutenant in 20 years you're already insufferable enough." The boy grinned like trouble and scampered off toward a mother who didn't know whether to cry or scold first. A shadow slid across the square that didn't belong to a cloud. Naruto's shoulders came up before he thought about it, and his right calf told his right foot it would like hazard pay. He turned. Shion stood at the edge of the market like a warning somebody had painted very carefully and then tried to rub out with their thumb. White robes without ornament, amethyst eyes that were not wide but deep. A talisman lay against her sternum and did no work because the work had been done by the way she had come here. She was breathing like someone who had run and then pretended she had not. She was angry, not at anyone here, at a sentence she had been given and had refused to read all the way to the period. "Naruto," she said, and the way she said his name said that she had seen him die 5 times and none of them had stuck. He lifted a hand and then put it down again because she was not for touching in this minute. "Hey, Shion." Hinata's eyes softened and sharpened at once. She took one half step back that allowed Shion into the circle without making it a circle. Tamari assessed Shion like a new tool and then like a friend with a habit you learn to plan around. Land of Demons, she said. Prophet girl with the spine. Priestess, Shion corrected, just to keep the math clean. The title is not the point. What is? Naruto asked. Shion jerked her chin toward the sky where the seam had been. The scale. Tamari made a face understandably tired of metaphors. We just fought a net and a neat man. What's the new toy? Shion's gaze slid over Naruto's collarbone and, without needing to see anything, saw it anyway. They branded you. Naruto had planned on being casual about that. The plan retired early. Yeah, he said. Feels like someone changed the hallway between me and the door I use. Hinata's hand lifted then, not to touch but to hover near where the mark sat under language. It's not working all the time, she said. It flickers when he forgets to care. Shion's mouth curved. Then our workaround is built in. She turned back to the seam. They carry a scale that judges variance. Not power. Not intent. Deviation. The farther you are from their preferred mean, the more the world will cooperate with them about you. Tamari huffed. So boring I almost respect it. Boring is an aesthetic, Shion said. And a very effective doctrine. Naruto rubbed at the back of his neck. I'm going to need that said less like a poem and more like a map before we leave the village with our heads still attached. Then don't leave yet, Tamari said flatly. We have wounded, smoke, and a net that will probably come and go for the rest of the afternoon. I'm not letting you chase a quiet librarian int. Oh the sky until I can hand my evac corridors off to someone with a promotion. Naruto looked out over the square because he was the kind of man who needed to see the thing he was responsible for before. He went running after the part of it that would make a good story. Medics worked, efficient and mean about wasting time. Wind kept moving where Tamari told it to. The bells had decided to be alive again and gave fire and footsteps a bit of spine. You're right, he said. Tamari didn't say I know. She said, if I let you two out of my sight for 10 minutes, try very hard not to pick a fight you can't finish before the tea goes cold. Shion's head snapped to him. You're going to want to chase them, she said, because naming someone's impulse is sometimes the only way to make it sit down. I am, Naruto said. Later. Later may not like you, Shion said. But she nodded. Good. They worked until the square felt like a square again and not a hole punched in a day. Naruto moved with the bra. A quiet hum under his skin that sang at odd times, which he filed away. Hinata made people breathe properly by standing near them and telling them to do it without saying a word like breathe. Tamar. I argued 3 merchants into sharing their water with a tone that implied she had a ledger with their names in it and a long memory. When the first wave of order had dried, Shikamaru arrived with a quad and the look of a man who had walked in on a chess game played by feral cats. He took one glance at the sky where the seam had been, one at Naruto's posture, and let out a sigh like a man who had married into responsibility and had learned to love it. Report, he said. Tamari pointed left, right, center. Hinata clipped a handful of sentences into precision tools. Naruto talked only when He needed him to and otherwise held the part that didn't carry words because he didn't want to start believing he knew how to name this yet. Brand, Shikamaru said at the end, eyes drawing lines in air and then erasing them because lines had to earn their keep. Something that thinks it's clever, Naruto said. Shikamaru's mouth moved half an inch. You say that about everything. Fair, Naruto said. Shion stepped forward. Shikamaru's eyebrows went up in a way that suggested paperwork, diplomacy, and a headache. Priestess, he said politely. Prophet, she deadpanned, just to keep the ledger untidy. Naruto grinned despite himself. He liked her more when she was rude. She sobered. They measure variance. They will come back when they have trained themselves on how you move. They will use what you do against you by making the most likely version of you the one that fails. Shikamaru squinted at nothing. That's irritating. Understatement, Tamari said. Shikamaru rubbed the bridge of his nose like he was negotiating with his eye sockets. Recommendations. Get everyone out of patterns, Tamari said. Rotate squads. Don't repeat routes. Make the city look like it's rolling its shoulders. Hinata nodded. Noise helps. Not chaos. Variance. Bells. Water. Wind. Things their lattice has to solve for. Shion stared at Naruto. And you? Stop trying to be perfect. That's your advice, he said, amused. It's not advice, she said. It's a demand. When you try to be perfect you ring a bell you don't hear, and they do. Shikamaru made a face that was not a smile and not a smile. She's hired. Already was, Naruto said, because the conversation worked better when your jokes did their part. They moved. Orders spread, sharp and short. The market remembered how to be loud. In the useful ways and quiet in the respectful ones. The lattice tried to be relevant. People stepped through it with the attention you gave a puddle if you had good shoes on. It still mattered. It mattered less. By evening the seam had not come back. Naruto felt the brand twice more. Once when a medic asked a question in a way that made him want to answer before the question was done. Once when he caught his own reflection in a bowl and almost thought about how he looked. Both times he let the impulse pass like a fly past a window. Hinata came to stand beside him under the bells. The light was going gold the way summer nights do when they're trying to apologize for the day being rude. She tilted her head a little, looking at the row of small brass mouths with the affection people reserve for things that do their jobs. You were better today, she said, not giving him the compliment directly because some compliments bruise if you throw them right at someone. I don't know what I was, he said honestly. Mostly I felt like a guy trying to cook with someone messing with the stove. That's still cooking, she said. And it made people eat. He breathed out, let the brand say nothing about it, and turned his head just enough to meet her eyes. He didn't reach for her hand. He didn't have to. The space between them had already made room. Tamari clattered up onto a stall roof with all the grace of a soldier who had earned the right to be clumsy when it didn't matter. She sat, legs dangling, fan laid across her thighs, and regarded the square with ownership that wasn't legal but was real. Shikamaru says Suna and Konoha will be drafting a joint statement that says, "Please stop quietly erasing our citizens, we find it inconvenient," she said. My wording. How diplomatic, Naruto said. I am never diplomatic when the alternative is fun, she said. Her gaze slid to Shion. You're going to drag him somewhere stupid, aren't you? Shion folded her arms. Somewhere necessary. Those are usually the same place. Tamari said. She wasn't objecting. She was rotating the map in her head. Shion stared at the sky like she could see the other side of it if she were just petty enough. They're not from here. They're not from your gods. The line to tug is sideways. There is a woman named Vados who wears patience like jewelry. She knows where one of the counterweights hides. Champa's world, Naruto guessed. Shion's mouth thinned as if the name tasted like a dare. If you like buffets and temper. Tamari groaned. Yes, send the boy who forgets he's a celebrity to a god with an eating disorder. What could go wrong? Naruto rolled his shoulder, testing the brand. It hummed for a half second and then minded its business. We'll go. Hinata didn't say I'm coming. She said, we'll need disguises. And anchoring seals. And someone who isn't a shinobi to look unimpressed while we move like a storm. Me, Tamari said. Naruto lifted his eyebrows. Envoy work light this week. It's not, she said cheerfully. It never is. But treaties are only worth the paper they're boiled into when the other side is writing reality with hardware. I'll brief Gaara. He'll say something Ike. Troublesome, but with fewer syllables and better eyeliner. He'll sign. Bring him a souvenir, Naruto said. Preferably a policy we can both sign that says, no, in case the neat men come back with a contract. Shion looked past him, through him, at something she didn't want to see and had decided to grab anyway. We don't have long, she said. Naruto caught her hardness and put it somewhere safe. We have now, he said. That's a start. They made ready under the comfortable tyranny of work. Tamari sent runners, wrote a letter that had the minimum number of apologies required to keep Suna's council bored rather than angry. And requisitioned a cartload of nothing that would look like something if you weren't allowed to know the difference. Hinata drew sealing ink in strokes that guided more than they commanded. Shion sat with a cup of tea and spent 10 minutes staring at the steam like she could edit the script it wrote in the air. Naruto stood under the bells and let one of them ring because he wanted it to. Because the square deserved a sound that didn't need permission. It was small and clean and exactly the right size to fit into the shape the day had left. When night dropped a shoulder into the market, they walked together toward the edge of the village where the sky got thinner and patience grew long legs. The brand scribbled a single line on the inside of Naruto's skin and then shut up. He adjusted his jacket. He thought of Whis stirring tea, of Beerus pretending that gratitude and appetite were different things, of the row of bells he had crossed without ringi ing because he'd chosen to be less clever than the wind. Tomorrow, Tamari said. Tomorrow, Hinata said. Shion nodded once like a bell choosing the note it would use when the moment arrived. Tomorrow, she said, and made the word an argument with fate that fate would not enjoy. They slept a little and badly and well enough. Before dawn, Naruto dreamed of a seam in the sky that laughed quietly in a library voice and of a woman who measured variance with a scale that broke when someone breathed as if they meant it. He woke with the taste of broth in his mouth and the memory of a bell that had rung for exactly the right reason. He did not say any of this out loud. He got dressed. He packed the tools that knew the way his hands worked. He wrote a note for Iruka that said nothing useful and everything important in 3 lines. At the gate, Shikamaru looked like a man who had slept even less and had enjoyed the experience as much as he enjoyed anything he had to do that took more than 3 steps. He handed Tamari a scroll, Hinata a packet of something that would be called medicine by someone with a title, and Naruto a look that said try not to break a god if you can break his habits instead. You sure? Shikamaru asked. No, Naruto said, and grinned. But that's when it's fun. Troublesome, Shikamaru muttered, a word Gaara would indeed improve upon. He stepped aside. They stepped out into a morning that had made up its mind to be bright. Somewhere behind them a bell rang, once, because it wanted to. Naruto breathed the way Whis had taught him when nobody was teaching anything. He did not reach for perfect. He reached for useful. The brand behaved. Let's go bother the people who think they own quiet, he said. Hinata's eyes warmed. Tamari tilted her chin, a queen in sandals. Shion set her jaw like a gate closing behind a decision and walked. The path to a different universe isn't a road. It's a conversation with a door that thinks very highly of itself. Whis had give N Naruto the sentence to start with and the tone to use when the door pretended not to hear. He said the sentence, used the tone, and the world obliged. They vanished into the kind of blue that was too clean to argue with. Behind them, bells swayed and made a music that remembered who it was for. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. Sparks on Champa's table. The sky they stepped into was the kind that didn't blink. Color so clean it felt rehearsed. A handful of moons hung like polished stones around a planet that had replaced subtle with scenic. Naruto felt the pressure change on his gums and grinned like a man who knew a door when it slammed open. They came down in a city that liked neon and opinions. Tall ribs of metal held up streets in the air, vendors shouted in languages that used elbows. The air tasted like hot iron and citrus. Above it, a seam tugged, and an annular team unfolded into a district of stacked homes and low-slung roofs. A woman was already fighting them. Brown hair wild, knife grin wider. She met a white uniform with a knee, bounced off a sign, laughed because she liked the bounce, and punched the lattice like it had insulted her sister. It bent enough to complain. Her key flared. Not cold, not tidy, hungry. Honest, unrepentant. She saw Naruto touch down, clocked the way he didn't land so much as decide the ground was currently where his foot needed to be, and beamed. Hey, Orange, she yelled, delighted. You look like a good mistake. Working on it, Naruto said, and moved. Quietus here had teeth. It caught elbows mid-punch, erased the second half of a lunge, made gravity persuasive. Naruto let the net talk and heard the gaps under the words. Hinata flicked to his flank. Tamari had already found height and wind and attitude. She set seals with her eyes and then with her hands. Writing tiny sentences on the edges of the air. The woman shot across his vision again, this time at his shoulder. Name's Caulifla. If you steal my kill I punch you after. Naruto, he said, stepping through the space her foot had recently rented and giving a white uniform the world's gentlest trip. And deal. She laughed like a belle that had just realized how to be rude. They ran the district like it was a problem set that didn't deserve to be smug. Hinata's fingers struck empty angles and made them own up to being structure. Temari's fan turned alleys into lanes, lanes into halls, and shoved civilians through with a politeness that had no time for dithering. Sheehan murmured, "If then," at a door, and the door agreed that if a person's fear looked like a child's face then the latch could choose to be tired. Caulifla was all offense. She didn't dance around quietus, she punched through the parts of it that had underestimated how much she enjoyed being underestimated. Naruto met her halfway with movement that didn't argue and didn't apologize. An annler stepped to cut him off and found Naruto was a rumor, Caulifla's fists were facts. The leader here didn't commit to a face either. He did carry a device that listened to what their bodies were trying to do and took notes. He watched Caulifla with professional distaste and Naruto with something closer to interest and raised a hand. The brand under Naruto's collarbone woke like a hand laid on a brake. His step hesitated a breath. Caulifla's laugh caught in its second syllable. "Go," Hinata said, eyes pale lightning. "Left. Me." Naruto didn't think about the instruction. He didn't ask. He ran his footwork through her cadence and the brand let him breathe. Caulifla's arm nearly got red by the lattice. Yuto gave her a shoulder hard enough to be rude and her strike landed where it would be rude back. "Okay," she whooped, eyes bright. "You can hang." The white uniforms compounded. The net buckled, then reasserted. Civilians moved because Temari made them. Sheehan's eyes were at a faraway angle, counting something that didn't like to be counted and doing it anyway. "We're not their prize here," she said in Naruto's ear, voice low enough to hide in the word. "We're their homework." "Then let's give them bad notes," he said. They did not win. They made it expensive. They made it loud. The annulers folded out with the quiet assurance of men who had collected what they'd come for. Caulifla swung on a sign and dropped to street level in front of Naruto like a meteor with opinions. "You," she said, jabbing a finger at his chest. "Grin reckless. Fight me. Then help me hit whoever those idiots answer to." "Not first thing in the morning," Naruto said, and jerked his head skyward. "But yes." She cocked her head at Hinata, at Temari, at Sheehan, taking them in the way you take in people you're already planning to be rude to fondly. "You lot always this neat." "Only when necessary," Temari said. Hinata's mouth turned up a millimeter. "Welcome." Sheehan blinked as if an equation had decided to be a person and she'd decided she could live with it. "We need a man with an appetite and a woman with a staff who has never once gotten soup on her sleeve." Caulifla frowned, then laughed. "Champa and Vados, you got in with them." "Got ramen," Naruto said. "Ramen opens most doors." Caulifla scratched at her cheek, eyes glinting. "Then you'll definitely want me along. I break doors. You charm them. Same result." "Where's your crew?" Naruto asked, because he didn't like leaving people he'd met only tea. Oh, find out later he'd disconnected them from their net without a plan. "Off being mad I don't listen," Caulifla said cheerfully. "They'll live. Arcale will throw a building at me later for choosing fun without her. Either way, I'll bring souvenirs." They traveled an hour and a world without taking a step farther than a good story needed. It helped that Vados found you when you behaved like people she found interesting. Champa's world put Beerus's to shame by trying harder. The grass had an opinion about green that you could taste. Mountains wore crowns of dessert like clouds. At the center, a table the size of a small nation staggered under plates. Champa himself sat with the posture of a sated leopard and the skepticism of a man who distrusted joy unless he had caused it. Naruto cooked. He didn't make a show of it. He placed tenderness where a pot would never be asked to forgive it. He slid onions onto heat at the exact second a breeze would carry their breath to a god's nose. He cracked eggs like a man who could feel when a shell was planning to be petty. He watched Champa side-eye bowl, try to be aloof, fail, and decide to be generous to himself. "This is not terrible," Champa intoned. "Given your face. That's high praise," Naruto said gravely. Vados stood beside the table like a ribbon that had learned manners. Her smile was small and so were her tells. She stirred her tea with the gentlest motion in the universe and said, "The way your friend moves is interesting." Caulifla leaned back in her chair, boot on a rail, as much queen as thief. "I'm right here. I noticed," Vados said. "You make the air jealous." Temari rested her fan on her shoulder and affected innocence. "We're tourists. Heard there was a place that made dessert look like an ideology." Champa preened. There is no place like this place. Also, no, we do not have the thing you are going to ask me for. We haven't asked yet, Naruto said. And yet you have asked, Vados murmured, soft. There is a forge. It uses Kachin. In its core is a harmonic device that does not like silence. Shion gave her a look that meant thank you and I will be annoyed later if I live long enough. And the people who own it do not share, Vados said, still smiling. They have a rule about letting mortals borrow the parts of the universe that don't like to be borrowed. I have never found it an interesting rule. Champa waved a hand. The Kachin Ring station is not mine to deny. It belongs to a neutral guild of smiths who believe objects have the right to be difficult. Annoying people, good croquettes. Neutral, Tamari repeated, tasting the word. That's the one where you wait until someone bleeds on your rug, then charge them for the stain. You understand diplomacy, Champa said, pleased. Naruto looked at Vados. If someone were hypothetically planning to touch the thing without an invitation, he said, would it be smarter to do it with the least possible noise or the most possible dessert? The first, Vados said. Always the first. She watched him for a beat. Unless the dessert is spectacular. Caulifla clapped once, delighted. We're doing a heist. We need someone who isn't a shinobi, Hinata said evenly. Who can wait better than we can? Vados lowered her eyes to her tea. I invited a contractor who is very good at not moving. I thought it would make the afternoon more entertaining. Android 18 arrived without fanfare and with a jacket that made her look like the rumor of a problem you'd rather schedule than solve. She slid onto a bench, scanned faces, filed them, and let her gaze rest on Naruto like a microscope deciding whether a slide was worth the light. Rates triple for divine locks, she said. Plus hazard. No civilian harm. Clean exit, Naruto said. Yo, you can charge me double for rudeness if we make a mess. Her mouth did something small and possibly a smile. I charge double for sentimentality. But you don't smell like that. We smell like broth, Tamari said, deadpan. Paid in full, Champa muttered, licking a chopstick, eyes closed in personal religious experience. The Kachin Ring station circled a dark blue moon like a bracelet around a wrist. It hadn't been designed so much as constructed by a committee that thought the phrase form follows function sounded sexy. Kachin panels made hallways that didn't know how to flex and doors that disliked questions. The core sat in the center of it all. A chamber whose floor had been argued into a hexagon, whose ceiling had been convinced to host a prism, whose walls were on better terms with Vados than with gravity. We don't cut, 18 said softly, as if she were reminding herself not to breathe too loud. We wait. Waiting was the part Naruto respected because he didn't enjoy it. 18 enjoy. D it the way a cat enjoys a warm sill that a bird might touch. She crouched near the first lock until the hissing line of light in its face finished the sentence it was writing and decided to settle. Then she touched it like a person greeting a dog she wanted to like her. It sighed open in a way that was between resentful and resigned. Hinata called time down to the half second because she could the way energy turned its head before it moved. She implanted a seal with ink that smelled faintly of thunder and wrote, if you ask for names, this door will be bored and forget, and the door, offended, forgot. Tamari moved air through vents in sheets that convinced sound to be lazy. Caulifla and Naruto were 3 rooms away picking a fight with a patrol they could outrun but refused to because running wasn't fun. You're ridiculous, Caulifla said happily, grinning at him over her shoulder as she backflipped off a service platform and nearly kicked an Anneller's device out of his palm on purpose. I like your ridiculous. It's quiet. Yours is loud, he said. It's honest, she corrected, and drove her fist through the square foot of space where quietus felt weakest. The patrol took hint and called for more complicated men. General Cade of the Shears walked like he had never in his life been surprised by a door being too heavy. Tall enough to make his men square their own shoulders without thinking about it. A jaw that had been carved by the same committee as the station. In his hands, a tool that wasn't exactly a weapon and wasn't exactly a problem and was definitely worse than both. He opened them delicately. The blades were slender, not dramatic, sculpture rather than threat. They gleamed without reflecting anything. He didn't cut at Naruto. He moved the shears the way a tailor makes a snip in cloth. Naruto felt the bottom half of his step separate from the top half. He tried to correct. His body obeyed. The correction didn't happen. He blocked an incoming strike. Somewhere else, a crate split. He feinted left. A patrolman flinched, and on the right a lamp went out in a puff of tired glass. Cade's smile didn't reach his eyes because it had more important things to do. Novel, he said, watching Naruto test and discard responses in fractions. You make chance obedient. I make obedience chance. Caulifla barreled in without asking for a thesis. Her kick landed. Nothing landed. The universe accepted the motion, took a message, and hung up. Hey, she snapped. Rude. Very. Cade agreed politely, and cut again. The shears took cause in one hand and Effic tea in another and told them they needed a brief trial separation. Naruto ran into that gap like a man used to fixing marriages. He failed, almost beautifully, because wanting became a kink in the line Cade snipped. The brand under his skin watched him with interest, helpful as an auditor. Hinata's voice came down the calm crystal with 3 words so clean he didn't have time to wonder why they were clean. Drop the want. He did. It wasn't a philosophy. He didn't freeze into perfect. He let go of the part of the motion that expects a result. He made a step with no plan for what it would do to the world, and in that unowned inch, the shears grip went looking for a lever that wasn't there. Cade cut, and nothing special happened. Naruto's heel set down, the rest of him followed like it had permission. Caulifla's punch connected, not with the force she had meant, but with the fact of it. Cade's head turned a degree more than he had intended. Surprise, small and real. Okay, he said, and foe. The first time his voice had a human in it. He became precise. The shears sang in the pitch of suture wire. Naruto flowed around cuts that moved as ideas. He stopped aiming. He let intent burn itself out before it left his bones and moved without the friction of desire. It made his steps look odd, half a breath late and somehow exactly on time. Cade adjusted. That was his sin. Adjustment grew want. Want grew handles. Handles let Naruto move Cade. Back in the core, 18 waited out a lock that would have humiliated a less patient person into being clever. She blew on her fingers in a gesture that was more about irritation than cooling. Now, she said, without raising her voice. Hinata's chakra thread touched a seam. Shien's seal wriggled a little and then became interested in law. Tamari mad. The air in a corridor go the wrong way and had the audacity to look bored about it. The core chamber opened its iris. The harmonic core wasn't a machine, it was a choice someone had convinced metal to carry. Small as Naruto's palm, suspended over a pedestal of Kachin, singing a chord you didn't hear so much as remember. 18 looked at it the way you look at a very small, very dangerous animal. Alarm. Always, Shien said, but softly. Good. 18 reached and didn't touch for a full second. Then she took it, gentle and decisive. The chamber inhaled to be dramatic. Tamari frowned at the ceiling and the ceiling thought better of it. Hinata cut a path through the hall's blind spots before the hall knew it had eyes. Cade felt the theft like a bone knows weather. He stopped being amused. The shears glowed a tone lower. He didn't aim one of the blades at Naruto or Caulifla, he cut the ground's promise to be ground. Caulifla's foot found air where floor had been, and the lattice, awake again, tightened a loop around her ankle. The brand in Naruto's chest flared like a warning light. It wanted his attention so it could yank on it later. He ignored it the way you ignore a waiter that's been rude on purpose to pick a fight. He pivoted, not to catch Caulifla, not to grab, not to rescue. He turned into the space where her fall would have tightened the net, and made a place for that fall. To finish like it was what she had meant. She hit his shoulder, confused and delighted. What did you? Don't finish, he said, then heard his own words and felt them hit home. Anything. She grinned like she'd been drinking lightning. Okay. Cade pressed. The fight courted farce. Blocks didn't block. Attacks made acquaintances with outcomes they hadn't invited. Naruto let himself be the part of the room that didn't mind being surprised. The more he didn't ask, the more Cade had to. Question piled on question until Cade's wrists told on him. The shears wanted to find a plan's spine. Naruto refused to have one. Pulling out, 18 said softly, as if she were talking about shoes. 2 minutes. Make it 1, Tamari said, and the station's ventilation learned what fear tasted like. Cade adjusted again. He is very, Very good. Xian thought, watching from the threshold, hands already writing seals for a door that didn't exist yet. He will be worse when he is angry. He wasn't angry now, he was content. He cut, and the cut went nowhere useful, and he understood that meant something about the boy he was watching. He let the shears drop, and for the first time he moved his hands empty. Naruto almost smiled. Yes. He and Cade passed through each other like two good cooks in a small kitchen, the dance space, the elbows narrow, respect large. In the center of that narrow, Cade's palm shifted. Quietus thickened. Every nerve in Naruto's arms got very interested in not finishing the wave it was riding. The brand gleamed. Almost enough. Hinata's voice, 3 more words, like the last seal in a sequence. Breathe between steps. He did. The brand lost a handhold. Cade's palm slid a fraction. Caulifla laughed once, a short bark, and slammed her fist into the slice of reality that had gotten complacent. The shears kissed empty air and, for a beat, didn't know how to be proud about it. 18 slid into the corridor like a promise kept. The core sat in a padded case that looked like it had been invented by someone with better taste than the guild that made it. Time to go, she said. Agreed, Tamari said, and peeled a wind corridor into existence that would wait exactly long enough for all of them and no longer. Cade stepped to bar it. Naruto stepped in without stepping in, body a suggestion, intent at 0. Cade cut the suggestion and got nothing. It annoyed him as much as it could. Annoy a man who prided himself on being a function. He made a tiny, human sound, HNH, and recalculated. Xian dropped a seal at his feet that said, if you try to make this room an answer, it will be a question. The room obliged. They were through the corridor before the station's pride returned. Alarms remembered themselves too late. The hallway they'd been in lay down on its side and considered its choices. In the dock, Caulifla vaulted into the little ship Tamari had bribed with praise earlier. 18 strapped the core into a cradle that looked like it hugged very carefully and said, if anyone touches this but me, they don't get to keep their fingers. Noted, Tamari said. Hinata took the pilot's seat because her eyes made instruments obsolete. Xian sat beside the core, one palm on the case, murmuring a lullaby for something that didn't sleep. Naruto stood with his hand on the bulkhead, feeling the brand flare once, shiver, and dim. Cade stood at the end of the dock, shears open and ready. Face composed like a man about to sign a document with nice penmanship. Naruto met his eyes. They were gray not because gray is the color of compromises but because Cade had arranged them to be. Tell your Archon, Naruto said. Soft enough it didn't reach anyone who didn't deserve it, that were bad at being measured. That, Cade said, with a tiny curve at the corner of his mouth, is why he likes you. They vaulted. The ship leapt. Vados's world stepped aside for their motion because she'd asked it to, politely, in the way that didn't admit it was a favor. Kachin Ring shrank behind them and, for a heartbeat, tried to be offended, then sighed and resumed being a station. Champa was mid-bite when they returned. He chewed as if chewing were a religion and he was a devout layman. Os glanced at the case under 18's hand and said, that was fast. We don't linger, 18 said. We invoice. Vados's smile acknowledged the joke and denied the premise. The thing in your care is a terrible guest, she said. It dislikes being where others prefer silence. It will help you make noise in the right ways. Tamari tapped the case, once. It thrummed a note so quiet it felt like a floorboard's hum. The sound ran up Naruto's arm and shook the brand until the brand sulked and shut up. Caulifla sprawled across a bench, threw an arm over her eyes, and laughed at the ceiling. That was better than beating up a tournament roster. Quote, you can do both, Naruto said. Boss, she said, trying the word on for size, as a joke, as not a joke. 18 stood, adjusted her jacket. We're square, she said to Naruto. Clean plan. No casualties we owned. Consider me unimpressed in all the right ways. Would you? He started. No, she said, amused. Call me if your next job involves polite locks and impolite clients. She looked at the core and at him. Don't let that thing think it's smarter than you. It's smarter than me, he said. I'm just more stubborn. Good, 18 said, and was gone the way professionals are, no flourish. No echo. Vados watched her leave like a cat watches a bird and decides fair play is boring. The one you fought, she said, as if commenting on the weather, will tell. The one who thinks about scales that you're fun. He has not had fun in a very long time. Archon Silex, Shion said, not asking. Vados's eyes warmed. Names are like bells. Use them and things listen. Champa set his bowl down with a sigh that made the table flinch. If the tidy people bleed on my rugs, I will be annoyed, he said. If you need me to pretend not to notice you using my air again, you are required to feed me first. Done, Naruto said. Hinata's fingers brushed the core's case. The hum ran up her arm and made her shoulders relax the way a good map relaxes your certainty. It wants a bell, she murmured. Then we'll give it one, Naruto said, feeling the outline of what they were going to build. And a promise it understands. They left Champa's world with more than they brought and fewer answers than they'd planned to ask for. Caulifla stuck to Naruto's shadow like a second thought and bounced when she walked because people who had survived being almost erased get to be joyful. Tamari sent 3 messages with 1 sentence each and a wind signature that could be read as consent if you spoke her dialect. Shion slept with her hand on the core because prophecy was worse when you pretended you didn't care. On the way home, the brand woke twice. Once when Naruto considered how to tell Konoha they had stolen a divine tuning fork, once when he thought about what it would feel like to make Archon Silex stop smiling. Both times he laughed and the brand, offended, found no handhold. Whis' tea steamed somewhere very far away. A bell on a staff waited to be rung for a reason. The seam in the sky learned the names of people it would be sorry to know. They came down over the forest north of the village, ship whispering and cool. Naruto set his feet on home soil the caution of a man who knows the ground can envy the sky. On the wall, Shikamaru squinted at the case, squinted at their faces, and sighed in a tone that meant he was going to have to invent an EU category of paperwork and then burn it. Troublesome, he said. Fun, Naruto said. A hush rolled over the trees like someone had said the word quiet in the wrong tone. The air thinned at the edges. Bells on the gate muttered in their mouths and then reconsidered. Shion looked up so fast the hair at her nape forgot to come with her. He's coming, she said. No drama, all fact. The one with the scale. Naruto pressed his palm to the case. The coarse hum ran into his bones and made a promise. Noise when you ask for it, silence when you need it, music when you earn it. Good, he said softly. I was running out of polite practice. Quote. Hinata stood beside him, not touching, very near. Tamari found the highest point of the wall and put the wind where it could eavesdrop. Caulifla cracked her neck and smiled at the sky with teeth. The bells around the village stirred as if whistling under their breath. The seam above them folded like a thought. A figure in white stepped through and behind him the air assumed a listening posture. Archon Silex carried a scale in one hand and the certainty that he would not need the other. His face had decided to be a face today. It made no promises and accepted none. He looked down at Naruto as if at a number he intended to round. Variance, Silex said, and the word didn't echo. It simply sat. Naruto breathed. Between steps, the bell on the gate chose to ring once, softly, as if remembering an old joke and deciding it was still funny. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. The Pale Garden. Silex stepped through the seam and the world behaved. Wind remembered it had been showing off and settled. Leaves stopped deciding to rustle. Sound took its hand off Naruto's back and waited to be invited. The Archon's white uniform wasn't fabric so much as expectation, scale in his right hand looked bored in the way expensive things do when no one is being interesting. Shikamaru's fingers hovered near his pocket, idle and lethal. Tamari rose on a slip of wind until she had the wall like a shoulder. Caulifla rolled her neck with the glee of a woman who'd been handed a very good problem. Hinata came to Naruto's left, Byakugan already drawing lines through still air. Shion stood at his right, jaw set. One hand on the case that held the harmonic core. Silex glanced at the case and counted it. He looked at Naruto and tried to round him. Variance, he said again, as if the word were a measuring cup. Naruto smiled because he'd learned smiling made this kind of man blink. You came to return the net you left on our market, he said. Very tidy of you. There was something like humor in Silex's gaze and then not. It had somewhere else to be. He lifted the scale a centimeter. A thread of air laid itself over Naruto's shoulder like a shawl of polite frost. He silenced Brand under Naruto's collarbone, woke and stretched. His breath faltered. Not stopped, not seized, just arrived late to its own chest. Ultra Instinct flickered like a lamp, annoyed at the power company. He didn't move. He didn't try. He let the flicker be part of the room. Hinata's fingers ghosted near his sleeve and then didn't have to. Silex's attention slid to her and then to Shion. He did not recognize Temari's fan as anything but decoration, which would turn out to have been a mistake. Caulifla he looked straight through until she smiled with teeth. He didn't look away quickly enough. You have something that hums wrong, he said, gaze returning to the case. It can come with me. No, Shikamaru said calmly, the way you would tell a friend a cigarette was a bad idea in a museum. Silex listened to the word and set it on his scale. It didn't matter to him. He lifted his left hand and the quietus lattice unfolded like a tablecloth, smooth, immaculate, so polite it erased the urge to argue. Temari didn't fight the net. She made wind into scaffolding under civilian feet before the lattice finished arriving. Shion's seal ink gleamed as she pressed a palm to the case. Hinata said, now, in that tone that wasn't louder than anything and still found its way into the bones of people who mattered. Naruto set his hand on the case. The harmonic core's quiet tone ran into him like a thin thread cast into deep water. It found the brand and made it itch. Shion, he asked, because some questions honor the person you know already has the answer. The door is sideways, she said. We take silence where it sleeps, not where it hunts. Silex turned his head a degree. Ah, you found a garden. He said it like a man who remembered a childhood neighbor, tedious, tidy, with excellent hedges. Caulifla rocked on her heels and grinned. Is it pretty? Because I'm going to ruin it. You will try, Silex said without malice. Naruto breathed. Between steps, he was going to have to move people out of Konoha before Silex made a point with the square they were standing on. He didn't want to fight here. He wanted space that could forgive. Invitation. He asked Shion. Proof, she said, already drawing. The seal she painted wasn't a character. It was a choice. If breath is present and belongs to the person breathing it, door, you will be embarrassed to remain closed. The seal warmed under her palm. The harmonic core sang a hair louder from inside the case, a hum you felt in the throat more than you heard. The seam above Konoha turned its head. Vados's voice threaded thrug, their calm crystal like a ribbon that knew the way. If you're about to annoy an old room, do take the noisier path back. I hate cleaning footprints out of nowhere. Gracious as always, Temari muttered. Tell Champa I'll make noodles for his rug, Naruto said, because kindness to the gods of appetite kept the sky friendly. He put his hand on Hinata's knuckles for a breath, not needing her to say yes, hearing it anyway. The seal flared. Space unzipped to the left, in a way that made none of the surrounding air feel jealous. It was a white place, soft at the edges, bright the way bleached bone is bright. A silence that wasn't absence, it was a habit. Android 18 stepped up from the gate stairs like the inevitable you'd forgotten to budget for. Jacket crisp, hair perfect despite the wind. Eyes bored the way professionalism uses boredom as armor. I figured you'd do this without paperwork, she said, taking in Silex, the case, the door. I left a whisper tag on your tuning fork. I bill extra for unannounced heaven trips. Temari blinked. You? How? Waiting is my specialty, 18 said dryly. You're welcome. Silex weighed the newcomer on his scale, found nothing that interested his doctrine, and filed her. Then he lifted the scale higher. Garden, he said, as if the whole world would nod and make way. Let us finish somewhere that doesn't pretend to be an argument. Naruto glanced at Shikamaru. The look back said, I hate this, it is necessary, I saw you become this person, I am proud of you, bring back a map. Back corridors on standby until you return, Shikamaru said aloud. To the wind and the walls and anyone who thought he didn't mean it. Naruto stepped into the white. The world changed its mind about having corners. The garden wasn't a place so much as a protocol. Her white ground stretched away in terraces that didn't know what slopes were. Trees without bark stood like punctuation marks in a sentence that refused adjectives. No birds, no bugs, no breeze to argue the air into motion. Sound went a little flat in the throat, as if you'd stepped into an empty house and knew exactly where the rugs had been. Quiet didn't press on you. Quiet watched to see what you would do. Gross, Caulifla said cheerfully. I love it. Do not breathe like you're trying to win, Sheehan warned. It copies anything you do too well and sells it to the next thing that asks. So it's an academy with better lighting, Tamari said. She kept her fan shut, thumb on the hinge. Someone had taught her this country's proper posture. No swagger, no feints. Mean it or be quiet. Hina. Ta's eyes were already full of threads the rest of them pretended not to believe in. Her voice wasn't a whisper. Whispers sound guilty here. There's a path, she said. It lives 3 steps to the left of wherever you want it. Silex came through the seam without ceremony and with the certainty of someone entering a home that had kept his slippers by the door. The scale didn't brighten. It didn't need to. This was its kind of room. Behind Silex, the garden brightened in small polite ways, as if recognizing a donor. The silence brand decided to grow up. It didn't flare or freeze. It arrived. Naruto felt it under the verbs he used for move and breathe and decide, soft and total, a suggestion in the spine that asked to be acquiesced to. Ultra instinct, which had been riding with him like a friend who knew when to shut up. Backed off a pace, not scared, not defeated, careful. Stillness, Silex said, the way judges like to say order. Sheehan's fingers tightened on the case. Then we use stillness that isn't yours. The path decided to be a path only when they gave up trying to make it one. Tamari stopped planning. The white ground agreed to show her a step. Caulifla stopped being fast. The air let her be present. 18 didn't hack anything. She stood, and the lock she hadn't seen yet realized it had nothing to prove by staying closed. They walked. The garden pretended not to notice. Silex followed without hurrying, a man confident the restaurant wouldn't run out of every dish he liked. The first trial arrived like weather. No banner, just the change in the way your eyes wanted to move. A corridor of white trunks like bones stood ahead. Between them, the ground sloped insofar as a thing can slope without admitting it is doing so. When Tamari lifted her fan, the path sealed over, smooth as a lie. She put the fan down. A seam appeared. Hinata's eyes traced the seam. It opens, she said, when command is offered, not exercised. Tamari scowled because she understood being insulted by architecture. She looked at Naruto and Sheehan and Hinata, then at the fan. Fine, she said. The fan stayed closed. Her shoulders moved back a millimeter, and that had always been the tell that she was trusting you. It's the worst thing to be handed and the best. Hinata, she asked. Hinata didn't pretend to be surprised to be asked. Left foot first, she said. Then stop for exactly the time it takes to decide not to apologize. Quote, Tamari did it. The path opened like someone had unlearned a bad habit. The ground felt the relief and allowed them through. Silex watched with interest, not praise. The scale tipped a hair in his palm. He adjusted nothing. The garden hummed, pleased to be an accomplice to a lesson it had always liked. They came to a field of shallow basins in the white, scooped out in a grid. Each basin held stillness rather than water. Caulifla looked at it like a buffet with a dress code. Don't jump, Sheehan said. What if I want to? Caulifla said. Then you wait until you don't, Sheehan said. Calm as guides in bad museums. This place eats first moves, and then seconds. Caulifla set her jaw. She wanted to run. She wanted to be the kind of person who didn't care about diagrams. She planted her feet, flexed her hands once, and did the ugly thing, nothing. Time stretched the way bad taffy does. The stillness in the basins whined at her like a mosquito you only hear because you're being good. Sweat skated under her collar. She waited until the wanting to go burned itself down into a small coal and the small coal cooled. The basin in front of her accepted a step. She took it. She said, which is how a person like Caulifla says I learned something. Silex's head tipped. Restraint, he said. Practical, unfashionable. Bite me, Caulifla said. Later, Tamari said dryly. After we ruin your hedge. The corridor beyond was a door without a doorframe. You could see the space where a door would have been proud. Android 18 approached it with her tools already in their places. She stopped, put them away, folded her hands in front of her like a person at rest, which she rarely allowed herself to be. There isn't a lock, she said. There's a test. What kind? Naruto asked. The worst one, she said. She looked at the door and did something unnatural for her. She imagined it would open because someone else wanted it to. No backup. No double check. No this then that logic graph in her pocket to comfort the part of her that had earned survival by making the world keep receipts. It didn't move. Again, Shion said gently. 18 exhaled. Her eyes didn't close. Hope, unadorned, is an ugly posture when you've trained it as an opponent. She held it anyway. The seam in the air sighed and let go of its own pride. The door, surprised at itself, opened. 18 didn't smirk. She looked almost angry. Then she looked relieved and worse, grateful, and she filed both feelings under invoices to be paid later. Don't tell Krillin, she said dryly. Wouldn't dream of it, Naruto said, sincerely. They climbed stairs that didn't have steps until Hinata decided each rise deserved to be named, and then they were stairs. They crossed a field of white bells. Hat didn't hang from anything until Tamari told the wind to mind its business, and then the bells were shy enough to be walked through. The garden had opinions, it preferred that you respected them by being interesting. At the center, if a place like this has a center, stood a pavilion as clean as a promise. No roof, 6 pillars that decided to be. Inside, a pedestal of the same paper white stone and on it a shard of something that couldn't decide if it was light or the memory of light. It looked like the world's laziest crystal and radiated the weird, indefensible authority you get when enough people agree you deserve it. Naruto felt it as you feel a man in the next room exhale when you say his name. Remnant, Shion said softly, disdain threaded with awe. Shibai Otsutsuki's instinct, torn off and left to feed whoever worships tidy. Silex's mouth, still, composed, tilted a hair. You understand it better than your kind usually do. I work very hard at being a disappointment to my kind, Shion said. The remnant liked Silex. You could see it in the way the brightness leaned toward his hand. You could see it in the way the garden, which had been playing fair, sat up straighter. Sile, X lifted his scale and the shard answered with a tone like porcelain touched with a fingernail. The silence brand on Naruto didn't flare, it turned into a room. Doors everywhere, most of them polite, the ones that weren't felt honest. Don't go cold, Hinata murmured without moving her lips. I'm not, Naruto said. I'm not trying to be empty. He realized, the brand worked best when he tried to be perfect. It found handholds on aspiration. It loved finish lines. It drank from people who were tidy inside themselves. He'd been trying not to be messy. That was a mistake. Shion, he said, never taking his eyes off Silex, do the thing. Quote, Shion's mouth quirked. I have several. The rude one, he said. He lifted his shirt. The brand lay under skin you couldn't see it on because that was the point. Bind me, Shion wrote. Not duty. Not fate. Breath. Present tense. She pressed the seal to the place under his collarbone with a hand that didn't shake. You can't unmake it, she said. Only make it irrelevant. Story of my life, Naruto said. Silex set his scale down on the pedestal beside the remnant. It balanced itself there like a cat. You misunderstand, he said, mild and correct. You are not interesting as a person. You are interesting as an error term. People keep telling me that, Naruto said. They are always bad dinner guests. Silex reached for the remnant, and the garden, which had been very good until then. Let itself forget to be a room and remembered it liked being a behavior. White light leaned. White pillars decided a roof would be vulgar and didn't bother. The remnant slid into Silex's palm like a bell that had been rung into an open hand. He didn't change. Not in any way that would be fun to draw. He became the idea he'd already been. The remnant's hunger, and his doctrine recognized each other like cousins at a wedding. They did not warm, they agreed. A wave rippled outward, not wind, not ki, not chakra. A consensus. Things should behave. The scale tipped without moving. Quietus rose in the bones of the garden the way tide rises in good harbors, implacable, kind to boats that belong, unkind to swimmers who think they are the sea. Naruto's body tried to be efficient. He told it no. He let his knee be an idiot. His ankle argued and then fell in line with the idiot. His spine refused to be a shelf. He felt Hinata's gaze on him, felt Temari's restraint beside him like a held breath. Felt 18's unearned hope burning its delicate shape into the room like a brand. Felt Caulifla, bless her, vibrate with the effort not to explode. Silex looked at him, and didn't make a face because men like Silex don't waste faces. Why insist on being less, he asked, when more is available? Because more isn't the same thing as better, Naruto said. And better isn't the same thing as truer. And truer feels nicer when I'm eating. Caulifla cackled because she knew what he meant. Hinata's breath hitched, not fear, understanding. Temari's hand twitched on her fan and then stilled, which was more heroic than any flourish. 18's mouth did not smile, the muscles near it admitted admiration. Silex made a small gesture with the scale. The brand took it as invitation. Ultra instinct dimmed like a candle near a window. Now, Hinata said, not loud. That word again, placed exactly where it needed to be. Naruto moved without asking his body to be consistent. He missed cleanly on purpose. Let the miss make a door. Passed through the door. Let the door close on the part of himself that wanted to be praised for how neat it had been. The brand reached for his CERTAINTY and found a room with furniture in it instead of a hallway. It got bored. Silex weighed him again and found a number that changed while he watched. The Archon tilted his head, and that was the closest thing he'd done to emotion. Annoying, he said mildly. Temari pivoted, fan still closed, and stood behind Naruto. That was the tactic. She would not lead when the room wanted leaders. Hinata stepped to his side where the net was thickest and made one palm strike at empty space that Tada seemed to confess. 18 didn't reach into a pocket, she looked at the place where a device would live. And let the idea of sabotage check itself for readiness. Sheehan murmured an if then, but the then was not impressive, it was honest. The garden approved. Silex lifted both hands. Quietus nid a lattice, out of the leftover stillnesses of every man who had ever decided not to cry. It came down across Naruto's shoulders like a shawl that wanted to be a plank. The brand swelled. It could not turn his breath off. It could make him agree to delay. He didn't delay. He inhaled in the middle of an exhale and exhaled in the middle of a step. It's ugly, there's no kata for it, it made the body behave like a lousy student. Ugly worked. The pressure slipped off angles that weren't there a second before. The remnant inside Silex's palm brightened, offended and intrigued. It pressed. The world's edges tried to align themselves with a ruler. Naruto could feel Whis somewhere impossibly far. He stirred, eyes kind. The memory didn't make him look up to ask approval. It made him present enough to stop trying to rescue his own legend. He wasn't a parable, he was a man moving. Bind the moment, Sheehan said. Not to victory, to breath. Her seal work wasn't art and it wasn't pretty. It was honest. She-ma. RKED the floor at Naruto's feet and tied present tense to the act of lungs doing what they do. If then, if breath, then choice exists. If choice exists, then measurement can't finish its sentence. The garden, to its own surprise, respected the grammar. Silex frowned, not with his face, with his doctrine. The scale wobbled, half a hair, the remnant shivered temper, and for the first time he didn't look like a clerk doing God's filing. He looked like the man as when you bump his elbow while he's drawing a line down a page. He closed his fingers around the shard and the room remembered that sometimes silence is not a virtue. It's a weapon. The brand in Naruto's skin pulsed once, hard enough to hurt. He decided. Break it, he said to Sheehan, not asking how much it would cost. Tie it to me, then cut it out. You're an idiot, she said, which is how you say I'll do it, and also stupid, and also my hands are shaking, and also I trust you to survive me. He knelt, a promise to the part of himself that hated kneeling. Sheehan laid two more seals, one that said, you are allowed to leave. Another that said, but only if the leaving means nothing. The harmonic core hummed in its case. Hinata's ND was warm at his shoulder without touching it. Temari stood with her fan closed and her eyes open. Caulifla bounced once on the balls of her feet and then stopped again because she'd learned and it mattered. 18 watched the door and, for once, had no good way to make the future do what she wanted. She let that be true. It hurt like pride. It felt like hope. Breathe, Sheehan said. He did. The brand tugged. Habit asking to happen. Sheehan's fingers danced. The seal's lines wrapped breath, nodded, found the brand's little bureaucratic desk, stacked paperwork in front of it, and said, "Not today." Shion slapped the second seal down like a signature. Naruto felt the brand lift like a weight he'd been carrying so long he thought it was posture. Then pain, quick and honest. Muscle remembering it could be tired. Ultra instinct, which had been riding with him like a god in the passenger seat, got out of the car. He swayed. Hinata stepped close enough to become a thought. He didn't fall. The world didn't collapse. He was a body with a brain and a breath, and a man was always enough to move. Silex's eyes cooled. The remnant glared without light. He looked at Naruto as if disappointed the arithmetic had become sentimental. "You have made your difficulty harder to calculate," he said. "This will not save you." "No," Naruto said, and grinned like a man who had chosen the dumb hard thing because it was honest. "But it will make me unbearable to teach." Silex lifted the scale and let it hang. "We will finish when you are more useful," he said. Then he did something that, later, when Naruto thought about it, would be the most frightening thing he'd seen a man like this do. He stepped back. Not out, not away. Back. He seated the center of the garden because he was a man who liked having high-s arguments in perfect rooms, and Naruto had made this one human. The remnant pulsed in his hand, a dog annoyed at a master who doesn't let it chase right now. He put 2 fingers on the shard and quiet. Edit the way a librarian quiets a room, with the confidence that quiet belongs to them by right. "Enjoy your variance," Silex said. "I prefer results." He folded out. The seam didn't even bother to harumph. The garden sighed and, mortifyingly, decided it had learned something. They stood for a minute in the white. Tamari made a noise that was half laugh, half oath. "Did we just get told we weren't worth the rest of the fight?" "We got told we were going to be graded later," 18 said, practical. "I'm used to it," Caulifla whooped, then remembered the basins, and did not jump. "He ran," she declared, satisfied. He postponed. Shion corrected. Her face was pale with the work and the cost. Sweat had washed the powder out of her anger, leaving something cleaner. She looked at Naruto's chest and then away. "You will be worse," she said. Naruto flexed his fingers. They felt like his. His balance was merely balance. Ugly. Beautiful. His body didn't move ahead of itself now. It waited to be told by the part of him that watched. "Good," he said. Hinata's mouth did a thing no one got to see except him. "You're intolerable when you're smug." "I'm intolerable most of the time," he said. "I just made it look elegant. Now we'll see it raw," she said, and her eyes warmed, which landed harder than any praise. Tamari flipped her fan open and shut again and finally let herself breathe like a woman who'd been careful for longer than was reasonable. "We have a counterweight," she said, nodding at the case. "We have a man who just made himself harder to catalog. We have a priestess who scares me more than most paperwork. We have a Saiyan who has learned waiting." Caulifla scowled like a kid being accused of good behavior. "Temporary," she warned. "Take the compliment," 18 said, and the back of her knuckle brushed Caulifla's shoulder without looking like she cared. "We have a door that we can walk through again if we have to. And we have time, because our tidy friend prefers finishing touches." Shion set her palm on the harmonic core again. It hummed, pleased at its own potential, irritated at having been polite for this long. "And we know what feed the remnant likes," she said. "Doctrine. Theirs. If we deny its sermons, it starves. Make the world messy," Tamari said. "I can do that. Not chaos," Hinata said gently. "Variance. Human. Which is messier," Tamari said, "and harder." Naruto looked down at his hands. They were nicked and scarred in familiar places. He breathed and the breath didn't answer early for him anymore. He'd liked that arrogance in his bones. He missed it already. He was relieved to find it gone. He looked up, at the white pavilion and the shard's pedestal, at the garden that had tried to be a perfect room and then had to watch a group of idiots ruin its aesthetic with feelings, and learn something it would deny under torture. "Thank you," he told it. The garden pretended not to hear. A good room knows when it's been made better by a stain. They turned back along the path that wasn't a path until someone deserved it. The basins let Caulifla step because she waited again, scowling. The door 18 had hoped on opened because she let herself do it again more easily. Which she disliked and kept. The corridor of white trunks accepted Temari's fan positioned under her arm like a promise to accept someone else's plan until the moment didn't deserve it anymore. Hinata led. Naruto followed, not with his old ghost on his shoulder, but with himself. At the seam, the world remembered edges. Konoha's heir rushed in, grateful to be allowed to be a little loud. Bells in the village made a noise so small it would have been embarrassing anywhere else. Shikamaru was where he'd promised to be, exactly in the place people needed their work to make sense. He took one look at Naruto's eyes, then at Shien's posture, then at the case, then at the place between Hinata's shoulders, and he rubbed his forehead like he'd married another new problem. Report, he said. Later, Temari said, short version. We didn't die, he didn't either, we learned rude things about God's cousin. Shien said, he's going to merge with the rest of the echo he's holding. And come back when he thinks the room is perfect. Tomorrow, Shikamaru asked, dry, resigned. Soon, Shien said, soon enough to be rude. Cool, Caulifla said, I want a nap. Android 18 checked her watch, which didn't tell time so much as keep appointments with problems. I'm staying, she said as if boredom had arranged it. Someone has to teach your civilians how to break suppression gear when the manuals are written by liars. Quote, Shikamaru grimaced in a way that meant, thanks, and also you're going to be expensive. We have a room, he said. I prefer rooftops, 18 said, and vanished th. Iway good help does when you turn around. Temari slid down from the wall and finally let her fan hang on its strap. I'm requisitioning every bell in a 50-league radius, she told Shikamaru. Put it on Gaara's tab. Hinata's fingers turned the harmonic core's case until it sat square on the crate beside her. Its hum threaded through the silence like a rumor, not loud, pervasive. Naruto set both hands on it. Okay, he said softly to his team, to the village, to the road between them and the man who wanted them to be a term on a page. We're going to make a song out of this. Shikamaru groaned. Please don't call it that in the council meeting. Then I'll call it a plan, Naruto said. We'll tune the bells to the core and lay corridors of variance through the villages. When quietus drops, people'll have someplace their bodies recognize. Hinata, you anchor sight. Temari, wind. Shien, bind breath. 18, break their tools and leave notes in the margins they'll hate. Caulifla, one strike when Hinata says, not before. Caulifla scuffed her toe and then grinned. Deal. Shien's gaze cut to Naruto's chest. You'll have glitches, she said carefully. Your body will forget it knows how to know. I'll learn it again, he said. Without the shortcut, he didn't look toward where Whis stood in a sky that had better tea. He didn't need a nod. He had his breath. It would be enough. Knights see. Aim on with the modesty of a person who knows they make everyone look better. The village lit lanterns. The bells clinked once and then decided that would do. The Shinobi Exchange office discovered it was out of paper for requisitioning bells and Shikamaru discovered he had exactly the right amount of cigarettes to decide not to smoke. On a rooftop, Naruto and Hinata sat with their shoulders almost touching. The harmonic cores hum under their feet a small, sure thread. You broke something everyone else would have begged to keep, Hinata said, not looking at him. I didn't like who I was with it, he said. I liked what I could do. That's different. She turned her head and the streetlit gold caught in her eyes and chose to stay. I see you, she said. He breathed between steps he wasn't taking. He didn't reach for her hand. The space between them had learned all day how to be kind. It managed it now without effort. Below, Caulifla stole a bun from a window where a vendor had left food. For anyone who came back late and needed it, she left 2 coins, scowled at her own decency, and ate with the appetite of the newly patient. On a different roof, 18 dismantled a piece of suppression ECH and wrote in a neat hand on the inside, this is why you fail at parties. Temari drafted the first of 6 maps you could give to people who weren't born to fight and still expected them to survive a god's doctrine. Shien slept like a person who'd finally argued herself into silence and lost on purpose. Far away, in a room that would call itself an office if it had any sense of self-deprecation. Silex placed the remnant in a larger cradle. He did not smile. He did not frown. He had never been anything but persistent. The remnant purred like a thing which imagined it would be fed. Variance, he said, And the word had no disdain in it. Only consideration. He closed his hand around the scale again and the room agreed to be quiet. On Beerus's world, Whis stirred tea. The bell on his staff considered its options and did not ring. For a breath, Whis's fingers paused, and that tiny stoppage went through the cup into the air and, because the universe likes a good joke, into Naruto's lungs. A kind of benediction the boy never heard. Morning would be rude. Tomorrow would arrive too soon. People slept because people do, even when gods are practicing their handwriting. Naruto lay on his bed. Akin watched Konoha's constellations made by windows. He didn't ask his body to promise him anything. He made his promise to it instead. Move when it matters. Laugh when you can. Ring the bell only when someone needs to know you're there. The silence brand was gone. The habit it had identified wasn't. He breathed. Between breaths, he smiled. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. 10 Directions, 1 Promise. Morning arrived with the soft confidence of a craftsman who knows how lids fit on jars. Mist lifted off the canal and drifted into alleys where shopkeepers were deciding which broom to use. Konoha's bells were everywhere now, hanging from awnings and eaves, under the lips of wells, above doors that had never needed bells before. Temari's requisition crews had been polite, which meant effective. The harmonic core sat open on a crate amid a spread of chalk lines and ink, humming like a secret everyone was ready to tell. All night, people had come by in 2s and 5s to get handed a length of string, a handful of tiny polished weights. And one clear instruction from Hinata: you're not making noise, you're reminding your body where it lives. Naruto stood under the gate's biggest bell with a wrench in his hand and oil on his fingers. He didn't feel like a god now, and the feeling was a relief he did not intend to name. His breath didn't skip ahead to give him answers. His steps waited to be told by the part of him that watched and liked what it saw enough to move. Check the north run, Hinata said, one glance up from her diagram. The third bell is lying to itself. Same, Naruto said, and jogged, grinning when she didn't quite hide the breath of a laugh. He climbed a lamp post, caught the bracket with his elbow, tested the bell's thread where it braided through the weight. The knot wanted to be clever. He made it honest. The bell settled, pleased to be the thing it was for. Android 18 sat on a warehouse roof, legs crossed at the ankle, a spread of annular tech in pieces around her like a disassembled bad idea. She didn't look up when Temari slid in beside her and set down tea that was perfectly average on purpose. You have a type, Temari observed, nodding at the gutted device. Fussy and expensive. Breakable, 18 said, which was praise. She plucked a filament free and weighed it on her finger. They're centralizing scale readings through 3 relay blossoms. Cut 2 and the third learns too much. Cut 1 and the other 2 go stupid arguing about whose numbers are true. Which one do we leave? Temari asked. The one every bureaucrat would choose, 18 said. The oldest. It's smug. Temari drank her tea and squinted at the plaza where Naruto was torquing a wire. You staying after? I don't do after, 18 said. I do next. She waited a beat. But my kid wants to meet the guy who keeps making gods eat ramen. So, maybe a night. Temari's mouth flickered. We'll set 2 bowls. Shion came down the street with a sheaf of ofuda tucked under her arm and SL. Eep still clinging to her temple like a misplaced blessing. She set a palm against the harmonic core and made a small noise under her breath when it thrummed back, like 2 instruments tuning to the same stubborn note. Breath first, she told a team of genin who were both too eager and too responsible. Then step, then sound. If you reverse it, you'll think you're brave while you make a mess. Genin nodded in the careful way of teenagers trying to be the right amount of solemn. Caulifla jogged in from the east gate with a bundle of copper wire over one shoulder and impatience on both feet. She dropped the coil near the crate and stretched until her spine popped. You ready for your lesson? She asked Naruto, smirking. Always, he said. Lesson 1. She raised a finger. You get 1 big hit. 1. Save it. Naruto snorted. Who are you quoting? You, she said, offended at the suggestion. And me, when I'm pretending to be smart. She leaned close. I'm gonna hold a hole the size of a window. When Hinata says, not before. Deal. Shikamaru arrived with a stack of maps he'd promised not to draw and a face that suggested he'd drawn them anyway out of spite. He stood by the crat. Ian rubbed his jaw while Hinata briefed 4 captains and 3 civilians with a clarity that made people do the right thing because their bodies liked how it felt. "You look human," Shikamaru said to Naruto, as if offering a diagnosis after an hour in a waiting room. "Tragic," Naruto said lightly, and didn't pretend it wasn't heavier than that. Shikamaru grunted. "Try not to win too fast. The council's not warmed up." The sky changed. It didn't go dark. It went still. A seam creased like a page marked with a ribbon and the quietest storms rolled in from nothing in tidy sheets. Not thunder. Not weather. A protocol descending. Polite and complete. Bells shivered and held. People across the rooftops looked up, then down at their hands, at the ground, at the nearest face they trusted. "Positions," Hinata said, and didn't have to raise her voice. Temeri's wind ran like rails down alleys and over roofs, carving corridors of safe air through the lattice. Her fan never stopped moving, small, precise shifts that made lanes out of panic. Android 18 walked to the edge of her roof, dropped 2 relay blossoms with a pair of neat shots that didn't bother with light, and left the third to drown in its own data. Shion pressed Ofuda to doorways, to wrists, to the inside of someone's doubt. Caulifla stood very still where she'd chosen, breath in, breath out, one strike waiting under skin like thunder under the horizon. Naruto put his palm on the harmonic core. The hum ran up his arm, into his chest, down into the floorboards of the city. He nodded to the bell captain at the gate, a retired woman with a scar through her eyebrow who had stood the wall when he was shorter and louder and got scolded more often. She raised her mallet. Across Konoha, bells rang in a stagger the way good laughter spreads through crowded places. The coarse tone threaded them together into a low, clean drone that made the lattice remember that bodies were built to move. A girl whose arm had paused halfway to her father's hand finished the reach. A Jonin who'd started a step without finishing it found his foot and let the step arrive. The net wasn't undone. It was given too much to solve. Silex walked out of the seam between clouds and chose to be here, not grandly. The scale in his hand looked brighter without glowing. Something bright peered over his shoulder and didn't bother to be a face. The remnant had stopped playing coy. He looked at the bells, at the core, at the village, at Naruto. Like a man scoping a room before a talk he knows he'll give well. He lifted a finger. Quiet as storms collapsed into columns. They came down like tidy rules. Where they hit, sound knelt. A corridor froze in mid-breath and Temari swore in 3 languages and 1 family dialect before nudging the wind in at a 45-degree angle with a motion so small it looked like nothing. The corridor remembered it was a hallway and not a wall. "Left side," Hinata said, Byakugan flaring pale. "Second column is thin at the root. Caulifla. Hold it when it collapses." "Say when," Caulifla said, rolling her shoulders, eyes never leaving their mark. 3, 2, now. Caulifla moved once. That was the whole tactic. 1 strike committed like a signature. She stepped into the place the column was going to forget, dropped her heel, drove her knuckles through the seam, and then, ugly, glorious, did nothing. She let the failure stand. The column stuttered. A handful of people walked out of a bad hallway into a better day. "Good girl," Temari said, like wind praising itself. Android 18 had found her 3rd blossom and was ignoring it so hard it could barely remember to blink. She reached into her jacket, pulled out a small device she'd assembled out of grudges and copper, and clamped it to the relay's base. The new MBERS the relay loved began to disagree with themselves in public. "Your books are wrong," she said, to no one in particular, in the tone you use when you know you're right and hate that you're enjoying it. Shion stood in the dirt of the training field with a brush and ink and a circle of children who'd been told to stay behind her. She wrote 3 characters on the ground and told them to put their feet on the strokes, if breath. Then choice. They did, solemn as saints, and when the lattice tried to ask them to pause, their bodies put the question down gently and kept moving. Silex watched the city do what it did. His mouth held its line. He raised the scale a centimeter and the silence of the storms deepened. Naruto ran. He didn't sprint. He moved down a street he had sanded with his hands for years and the street recognized him enough to be kind. The brand was gone. His body waited on him and he waited on it, and somewhere between the two, motion found the kind of clean it gets and you've been sweating all day and laugh anyway. Silex's first gesture was a courtesy, a sheet of stillness drawn across the square to see how the boy handled obstacles. Naruto didn't answer it, he let his shin scrape the idea of friction. The scrape made a note, a bell overhead found the pitch. He cut left through a stall where noodles thinned in baskets, the steam grabbed the quietus and made it heavy for a second. Enough for a medic to drag a groaning man 3 steps to a doorway. North, Hinata said in his ear, quiet like an arrow. You'll arrive a breath late if you go straight. Okay, he said, and did not ask how she knew. Silex's foot touched the ground. That was all. The ground calmed, a lake where a coin had been thrown and then forgotten. The remnant in his palm thickened the air until negligence felt like wisdom. Naruto stepped into that calm and did not get flatter. He let the parts of his body that preferred life to neatness talk. It wasn't beautiful. He clipped a crat with his elbow and used the stumble to slide under the edge of a column. His knee wobbled and he let it. It made him look human enough that the storm aimed where a god would have been, not where a man was. Variance, Silex said, almost pleased, and tipped the scale. Bells answered, not loud. All across the city, small mouths of brass remembered their job and did it. The harmonic corps guided the chorus, not conducting so much as inviting. The sound didn't fight the silence, it gave people a handhold they already owned. The storms cut air over Suna, too. Tamari felt it in her fan like a woman hears her name spoken in the next room. She drew a quick map with wind above the square, lines of salt and grace traced in the dust, and a message went out to a desert where a boy with a gourd and a history told his sand to learn a new noise. Over a cratered arena in Universe 6, Khalifa's neighborhood bells that had been hung in a window for a festival that never happened found their old voices. And heckled a problem into being less proud. Silex walked forward. Archons don't hurry. He looked past Naruto at the bell rope in the square and plucked the air above it. The rope stopped halfway to moving. Hinata stepped. Gentle step, soft, decisive. She pressed 2 fingers against nothing and made the nothing admit its edges. The rope came down. The bell swung and took a breath and sang. Silex turned his head a fraction. The scale noted disappointment. Null interface compromised, 18 reported lazily, which in her voice meant she had done something brutal and exact and didn't want to be complimented. Their reading stuck, wondering if 2 equals red. Good, Shikamaru grunted. He stood on the wall with a stack of new orders he hadn't written yet because people were already doing them. Keep them embarrassed. Shion scribbled on the back of her hand, blew on the ink, and set it to Naruto's wrist like a mother correcting a child's scarf. Breathe here, she said. Even when you're not. He as close enough to Silex to see the pores that doctrines forget to have. Why are you like this? Naruto asked, honestly curious, because curiosity had gotten him into worse and better trouble than any weapon ever did. Silex considered the question. He answered, because a man who weighs everything will always weigh words too and find them light. Because the system is elegant when noise is removed. You are noise. I prune for grace. Naruto grinned. You should try ramen. It's messy and perfect. Silex made the smallest sound. It might have been a sigh. He lifted the scale higher. The remnant leaned into his palm. Eyes without eyes crinkling. The square compressed. People bowed under weight that didn't bruise. Bells vibrated without making sound. Walls leaned away from the idea of motion like shy dancers. Naruto's bones liked the notion of giving in. He let them like it. He set his foot down anyway. He wasn't empty. He wasn't flooded. He was aware, and that awareness had warmth in it, because the people in the square were his. And being theirs gave him a shape that wasn't a number. A shout cracked across the roofline. Caulifla holding her whole, shaking with effort, face open and fierce. Now, Hinata's pupils contracted, fingers flicking once in a sign Naruto had learned in a winter under a different kind of pressure. Temari's fan snapped to the side and the corridor of air sheet. Bin nursing let go in a way that looked like a sigh and acted like a whip. Shion's seal on his wrist heated, the breath there became an anchor you couldn't trick loose. Naruto felt the path. He didn't try to be fast. He didn't ask to be clean. He accepted friction, made room for doubt, let the stumble be the step, and in the space that acceptance opened, something old came back in a new voice. Ultra instinct didn't flood him. It joined him. Not cold, not perfect, present. He gathered chakra with 3 fingers and a thought he didn't chase. It pooled without froth, smooth in a way that remembered the way broth looks when it's just right. He cupped his palm and the chakra didn't spin like it always had, it arranged itself. A sphere gathered, small as his hand and so quiet it felt like privacy. He'd always named jutsu like jokes told too loudly. This one didn't want a name he could shout. It wanted to arrive. He lifted the sphere. It sang under his skin at the same pitch as the core, as the bells. 10 thin threads of possibility, where harm would bloom, lay out around Silex like a map made by wind. The sphere, curious and polite, looked at each of them and chose the path that ended with the fewest broken things. Not no broken things. That's not a choice the world offers. The fewest. Silex stepped to account for a boy who would lunge. Naruto did not lunge. He took 1 pace as if stepping out of someone's kitchen. And the 10 directions Rasengan left his hand not like a thrown stone, but like an invitation. It didn't blur. It didn't scream. It passed by a panicked woman's shoulder and her hair didn't move. It crossed in front of a child's eyes and the child laughed because the laugh was already on his face and the world hadn't told it to stop yet. It brushed the remnants at tension like a friend who refuses to be impressed and slid between 2 measurements that had thought themselves married. Silex moved the scale to intercept. The scale understood force and counters and leverage and the soft pride of objects that get to be right in public. The Rasengan asked it, very gently, to be heavy somewhere else. The scale considered. It did not move, but its certainty took a half step back. The sphere arrived at Silex's palm. It did not explode. It arrived. And when a thing arrives, the room has to make a place for it. The remnant of Shibai, hungry for doctrines, reached for this motion and found nothing to feed on. No sermon, no tidy angle, no pretense of perfection. Only a decision built to break as little as possible and save as much as it could. The remnant tried to drink and tasted warm breath. It starved at the table. Silex's face didn't break. His doctrine did. Under his skin, something that had been a line got kinked by a knot. He staggered a step that would have embarrassed a librarian with bad knees. The scale dipped. Variance, he said, and this time the word was not dry. It was interested. Perhaps for the first time. The sphere didn't bore into him. It went on through and found the part of the remnant that had been allowed to become structural. It pushed, politely, in 10 directions at once, and the structure came apart into threads that didn't know how to be a net without the sermon that had tightened them. Around the square, columns sagged, sulking. Bells decided to be social again. The harmonic chords hum loosened into something that might have been content. People finished motions they'd started hours ago and laughed at the fact of arriving. Silex looked at his hand. It still held the shard. The shard pulsed, offended, diminished. He glanced at Naruto, then at Hinata, then at the core, then toward the bare seam in the air where the garden had watched. Consideration logged, he said, and somehow it didn't sound like a threat. It sounded like a man who had discovered a book in a section he hadn't visited and was annoyed to find an afternoon shrinking. He did not bow. He did not promise. He folded out. The storms went with him. Like a staff following their boss into a meeting they wished were emails. Silence stayed a beat too long. Then sound rushed in to fill it with elbows. A vendor yelled at nobody about fish as if fish had caused the sky to behave. A baby who had held back a scream because the polite air insisted on it chose now to share. Shinobi laughed like men who hadn't known how much they'd been holding until they were handed permission to drop it. Caulifla sagged onto her butt and flopped backward onto a roof as if the sun owed her money. Tamari sank to a sit on a crate and put her head in her hands for 3 long breaths, then wiped her face. Then pretended she hadn't done either thing. Android 18 kicked the relay blossom off the parapet. It shattered 3 stories down in a huff. Shion walked up to Naruto and, without ceremony, smacked his chest with 2 fingers where the brand had used to live. You chose the ugly way and I'm furious you were right. I choose the ugly way a lot, he said, Brea. Shaky with laughter now that he was allowed to notice he had won. It's prettier when it works. Hinata stood in front of him, not touching, very close. He tried to talk and failed because all the Words he had were show-off words and he didn't want any of them. She saved him the embarrassment of choosing. "I like the way you move," she said quietly, the little smile he only ever got aimed at him tucked in the corner of her mouth. "I like the way you see," he said, because it was true and because it felt good to put the truth where people could hear it. Shikamaru found them with a ledger in his eyes. He was already burning. He looked at Naruto's hands, then at the quiet bell above their heads, then at the little sphere of air still trembling where the Rasengan had been a breath ago and now was not. He sighed the sigh of a man who was going to have to explain metaphysics to someone who thought budgets were magic. "Troublesome," he said without heat. "All right up. We elected to remain complicated, for the council. Tell them variance got a raise," Tamari called from her crate. "With back pay." Android 18 hopped down off her roof and brushed dust off her knee with the same brisk motion she used to brush off sentiment. "Paid in full," she told Naruto, and waited a beat. "But I'll take a bowl before one go. I was going to make ramen anyway," he said. "Of course you were," she said. Caulifla came up under his arm and squeezed his shoulder because she was bad at restraint when it didn't matter. "You owe me a proper brawl," she declared, grinning. This polite slapping of God math was cool. "But I want to hit you when nobody's watching. I'll bring band-aids," he said. "Don't you dare," she said, delighted. Shion looked up at the seam in the air where a garden pretended not to have a favorite and made a small, rude sign with her brush that the garden was going to think about for a very long time. Then she laughed, and the laugh sounded like someone who had been given a world stubborn enough to argue back. By night, the village smelled like soup and tired wood. Steam rose from pots along streets where people had dragged tables out and decided food was a better meeting than speeches. Tamari ran the first war council over bowls and maps drawn with sauce on parchment because she liked devastating the dignified. Shikamaru lied about how much of that he'd planned. Naruto cooked because his hands wanted to. He set bowls down in front of people who had earned them and people who had gotten lucky and people who didn't think they'd done anything at all. He didn't make a speech. He didn't need to. A bell near the gate rang once for no reason anyone would write down and everyone understood the sentence. Somewhere on a world with impeccable lawns, Beerus lay under a parasol with a plate balanced on his chest and the satisfied look of a predator who has successfully delegated. Vados watched a distant corner of reality and didn't smile in a way that was considerate of people who would have died if she had. She stirred her tea and, as a kindness, didn't say out loud that she'd known how this would go and had enjoyed being proven a little wrong. Whis set a kettle aside. His staff leaned. The bell hanging from it considered its options. For a minute, the angel did nothing at all, which was not like him and also exactly like him. Then he lifted his staff and the bell chimed once, as if a polite piece of glass had decided it could indulge in pride without becoming unbearable. On the Konoha wall, Naruto stood with Hinata and watched lantern light make rivers out of streets. He felt the fatigue in his bones and liked it. It was the kind of tired that meant most people would sleep. He breathed the way he'd promised, between and through, with room for doubt. And something else that had come back wearing the clothes of an old friend. "Do you think he'll be back?" Hinata asked. "Yes," Naruto said, and didn't sound worried. "But next time he'll bring questions, not just answers." Hinata considered that and let it be true. After a while she slipped her hand into his. They stood there like that for a long time. No speeches, no drums. A bell rang at the far end of the village when someone went home. When they finally climbed down, Naruto left the gate bell as he'd found it, tuned, ready, quiet. The core hummed in its crate like a thing that had made its LF useful and could be put away without sulking. 18 sat cross-legged on a rooftop, sipping tea she pretended was worse than it was. Caulifla snored on a bench with a half-eaten bun on her chest and a grin on her face that suggested she'd won an argument with gravity. Shion slept with ink on her fingers. Tamari was drawing a treaty in words nobody would like and everyone would obey. Naruto glanced up once toward a sky that had politely decided to be boring again. He didn't bow. He didn't wink. He went home. Just before he closed his door, a small bell by the lintel rang, once, for no reason that could be measured. It sounded like a promise that had found a place to live. Chapter 5 End.